All right. So we're going to just do a quick little advocacy training to kind of get folks ready for our Medicaid Expansion Advocacy Day, Love Thy Neighbor Advocacy Day that's happening next. Uh, is it Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday, 14th. I think it's a
Wednesday.
Tuesday. Um, um, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with my PowerPoint and we can get rolling. Let's see. All right, can everybody see that okay as we're loading? Okay, everybody see
Yep.
that? Great.
Yes.
Awesome. So this is a quick little advocacy training that we created with the organization I work for. My name is Matt. I use he, they pronouns, and I work with the North Carolina AIDS Action Network. And this is just a way to kind of set up some advocacy meetings, whether that be meetings with representatives, press conferences. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of formulate this, but it's a way to create an advocacy meeting so that everybody has a place and feels like they are able to have these meetings in a really successful way. We're going fast. Okay. So by definition, advocacy, of course, is the public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. But for us, that means it's a chance to talk about and bring awareness to the issues that are really important to us. So for this event, will of course be Medicaid expansion. I find that this training can be used across a bunch of different advocacy realms and strategies. But for our particular cause is to talk about Medicaid expansion, bring awareness to that topic, to represent our communities and those who are most impacted by our cause. It's really important to put a face to our cause. It's a chance to share personal stories or experience about the cause to really kind of nail in the person-centered focus of this and to ultimately make a change and hopefully pass Medicaid expansion in North Carolina in 2023. And I think it's going to happen this year. I'm speaking it into existence. So what kind of events are we talking about? There's a bunch of different ways that advocacy can take root. That could be press conferences, town hall meetings, educational events, panel discussions, meetings with policymakers, media pieces. But for tonight in particular, we are talking about meetings with policymakers and how we can formulate those in a way that is clear and concise and everybody has a clear role in the meeting. So there are 5 key roles that we're going to be talking about because everyone has a place in advocacy, and this is a way to get everybody in your group involved. And those 5 key roles are the introducer, the storyteller, the fact knower, the note taker, and a special role called the social media magician. So first and foremost is the introducer, and this is the very first impression that you are going to leave with your audience. So for this case, with the representative. So this job is pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Your job is simply to introduce yourself, the folks who are in your group, and then to give a brief explanation as to what you're going to be talking about or advocating for that day. So it's really important for the introducer to kind of set the tone of the meeting. So it's good to be friendly, to be approachable, and be someone who's not afraid to be heard. So I always say that these first 3 roles, the introducer, the storyteller, and the fact knower, are most suited for folks who are a little bit more extroverted. There are also places in advocacy for introverts, and we'll talk about those roles as well. But because you will be talking the most during these meetings, I always say the introducer, storyteller, and fact knower need to be someone who's a little bit more comfortable speaking in front of a group of folks. This role also works really well as a natural facilitator or moderator whenever you're in these meetings. We all know that sometimes when we have meetings with policymakers, they tend to go a little bit into left field and start talking about things that may not be super related to your cause. So the introducer can also be the person that can help redirect that conversation so that if it starts going astray, they can really reel it back in and say, well, that's a really interesting point, but we're here to talk about this so that you can really get back onto the point of your meeting. Because these are really quick meetings, they're like 10 to 15 minutes, squeezing in when we can. So it's really important that we stay on task and really talk about what we're there to talk about. It also is a great role for the introducer to kind of wrap up everything at the end, kind of give a quick little summary, and can also have that final ask. Next is what I would probably consider the most important meat and potatoes of the advocacy meeting, which is the storyteller. So very simply, the storyteller is there to give a heartfelt description of why this subject matter is important, particularly to them. And simply just make it personal and be yourself and tell why this is important to you. So it's important to kind of center those people who are from the legislators area, have a story to tell of why this is impactful for them and the community that they come from. So depending on the type of event, the storyteller can be the same. So if you have multiple meetings across the day with legislators, you can keep the same storyteller throughout, but it doesn't have to be the same. It can change from meeting to meeting. But the most important thing about the storyteller is to be real, because the most effective stories are always real and relatable. So you don't have to have frill and drama and everything, but just come from your experience in your life and why this is so important to you. And I always say this is the most important role, because when we're really putting a name and a face to a cause, the storyteller is what really gets the task across the finish line to me. Now, unfortunately, in some cases, we have representatives who are not so concerned about the story, but really want to know about the facts and the figures. What's it going to cost? Why is this important number-wise? Who from my delegation is going to be impacted by this? Why is this important? So it's important to have someone who is there, who has knowledge of the facts and the numbers, the science behind what your topic is talking about. So in your packet, you'll of course have some fact sheets that we'll be leaving behind with representatives that folks can use to pull this information. But as I mentioned, some policymakers are just much more focused on the information rather than the personalization. So it's important to have that in your back pocket to kind of go along with your storytelling. Super important to always make sure that you're using actual facts and numbers, so don't make stuff up, just because this can definitely come back to bite you in the butt. So it's really important to make sure that those are clear facts, and there is no problem when someone asks you a question and you don't know by saying, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can get back to you. And that is a great place for us as kind of facilitators of this type of advocacy day to find places where we can go and touch again, and to go and meet with those representatives and say, hey, I heard so-and-so, you had a question for them and they weren't sure how to answer it. So we wanted to follow up with you so that we can give you that answer. I also say that it's really great for the fact knower to also kind of figure out what the storyteller is talking about and figure out how some facts can kind of relate to the story. It's really great to have a story that aligns with the fact, so that it's cohesive, it makes sense. It's a way to kind of back up the story to make it even more impactful. So our first three are the extroverted. So we've got our introducer, our storyteller, and our fact knower, who are going to be the ones who are kind of leading the meeting and taking on the talking with the representative. Now comes to what I would typically take on is a more introverted role. Even though I am presenting tonight, I am much more introverted and prefer to take kind of a backseat. So I like to be the note taker, and this person is just simply responsible for keeping track of what's going to happen during the meeting. So what did you talk about with your representative? What was your representative's response like? Was it positive? Was it negative? Did they have some kind of visceral reaction to it? Were there any follow-up questions? Was there anything that you didn't know how to answer that we can follow up on? So it's really important for the note taker to be thorough and detailed so we can know exactly, how these meetings went throughout the day, and we can know where to focus in the future, because we know this is a long fight. We've been in it for 10 plus years, and we are going to keep at it until it's done. But that means it's going to have areas for us to go and touch in the future to continue these conversations and make this go across the finish line. It's also really important that the note taker is honest and gives both positive and negative things about the meeting, because if we find someone who is extremely perturbed whenever their constituents come and talk to them, it's important that we know that, so we know that maybe it's not worth spending too much time working with this person. It might just be a case where it's like, we don't want to put people through that again. They know that it's going to be negative. We don't want to have folks deal with that again. But also, you might find some folks who may not think would be positive that turn out to be really great conversations. Maybe your story impacts something or moves them in a way that they have something they can relate to. So it's really important to keep track of those positive and negatives throughout the meeting. And then, of course, like I mentioned, keeping track of any follow-up so that we can stay in contact with these representatives so that we're in this for the long fight. And then finally, kind of a special little role is the social media magician, and this is just simply to make online presence known throughout the day. So whether that's taking photos with your group, asking for photos with the participants and the attendants and the representative, and ways to kind of share what's happening during your meeting, because we all know that we're a social media hungry people. And this is a way for us to really share our experience through the Advocacy Day for the folks who may not be able to make it to Raleigh for the day. So kind of let people know why advocacy is important outside of those who are just able to attend the meetings. Side note, I will say that this role is best suited for someone who actually knows how to use social media. So we're not going to judge you if you're not tech savvy. Though I'm a millennial, I am not social media savvy, so I know this is not the best role for me. I am the worst about going somewhere and someone saying, you need to tweet about this, and I forget to tweet about it. So if just know your strengths, that is okay if it's not your strength. But as a social media hungry people, it's great to have this so that we can kind of bring people into the fight from all different parts of North Carolina. Also, a lot of representatives have Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts, and they like to be tagged in those things and kind of show what they're doing throughout the day. So it's a really great way to elevate our message even further. So a couple of tips and tricks that I think are really important to think of when we are creating these meetings. So of course, number one, don't make anything up. If you don't know the answer, it's okay. Just say, I can't give you that answer. I don't know it, but I can have somebody follow up with you. Easiest way to do so. It's also important to disagree respectfully. If you're at an event or having a meeting and things start to go south, it's okay to just, I am not somebody who says you should actively combat it whenever someone's negative to you in a policy meeting. Sometimes it's best just to be Southern and bless and release it and say, thank you so much, have a great rest of the day, and you just call it an end. With this, I always say that we kind of create these key roles so that you can prepare what you're going to say in advance, so that you can assign your roles, you can make your plan. That way, when you're in your meeting, if something kind of starts to go a little off course, starts to go awry, you know how to recover. We never know how these meetings are going to go from start to finish, but it's good to have a blueprint so that you know if this happens, then we're able to get back in line with our blueprint to make sure that we're getting what needs to be done. Of course, stay on topic and stick to your message. I think one thing that we a lot of times forget whenever we go into these conversations is that though these people are making laws and policy change, we are the expert of our own lives and the experts of our experience. So it's really important to bring your message and control the conversation, because it is our lives who are impacted by policy and law. And of course, policymakers and elected officials work for the people. So it is their job to listen to you. So don't be afraid to speak your mind and tell them why advocacy is important to you and in this space, particularly with Medicaid expansion, because they get paid to listen to us. We put them in office. So it is our job to go and speak to them and make sure we are holding them accountable and telling them what our state and folks need. So with that, I will stop there and see if folks have any questions. I would typically give us a little time to practice, but there are just a few of us, so I'm not going to put anybody on the spot because I am someone who does not enjoy role play situations in small breakout rooms. So just wanted to pause and see if anybody has any questions about this.
I'm sure there's a fact sheet with a few facts, like how many people die in North Carolina every year. I probably need a review of that. Is there a place I can download that from?
Yeah, so we will definitely have all of that stuff in our packets whenever you come to registration. Yeah, so in just a second, we're going to go over just kind of a what to expect for the day whenever you get to Advocacy Day. And we'll be sure to share that with everybody. So yeah, there will definitely be that, because I'm the same way. I need something in front of me to give me numbers, because it just jumps right out of my head. And Rebecca just shared it in the chat as well. So there's the fact sheet for next Tuesday.
Is the Love Thy Neighbor Advocacy Day being organized by a coalition of organizations or the Medicare for All coalition? Or I didn't get who was North Carolina policy or
it's the Health Action NC coalition. And so North Carolina Justice Center is part of it. Obviously, North Carolina AIDS Action Network. We have a lot of great partners, Pro-Choice North Carolina, Down Home North Carolina, on Action NC. Like, I can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful coalition of folks from across the state that are working to get this over the finish line. And we're doing the Love Thy Neighbor theme because you know, there's always time to be confrontational, but this is not one of those times. This is the time to be very positive, very encouraging, because we're closer than we've ever been. And that is why we have couched the whole thing in this Love Thy Neighbor, to really show how it is a good thing. It's going to be so positive for North Carolina, for our people, for people in rural communities, for people who are working low-wage jobs. I mean, and you'll see that in the fact sheet. So the fact sheet is structured in a way that's like, this is how we can love our people and our state by doing this.
Advocacy is an act of love. So very quickly, I want to share this with folks. I'm going to make sure that we have some copies of this in the various packets at registration. But I created a kind of a little worksheet for our advocacy so that you can kind of plan these meetings in advance so that each group can kind of figure out who's going to take on what role and can really kind of brainstorm to create that blueprint. So you've got your general meeting information with your date, time, and office location so that you know exactly where you're going. You can go ahead and assign your roles as to who's going to take on what role so that you can get that set for the meeting. And then I created kind of a key points box. So you're going to kind of highlight what key points you're planning on talking about. So this is a place for the storyteller and fact knower to kind of collaborate together to make sure they're hitting the right things. What key facts and statistics do you think will be helpful based on what your storyteller is going to be talking about? And then what is the ask going to be for the representative? So for this case, of course, is going to be, we ask you to support Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. So we will have these ready for folks on Tuesday as well. But I think this is just a kind of an easy way to help us blueprint what the different meetings are going to look like. All right, and I'm going to hop back over so that we can quickly go over what to expect for our advocacy day on Tuesday. So this is next Tuesday for Valentine's Day. I'm excited to spend Valentine's Day with some of my favorite advocates across the state. So just a kind of a quick thing to kind of get us ready for the day. So here's a quick schedule. Registration will be in the North Carolina General Assembly in the 1000 court, which we'll talk about later, from 9:30 to 10. So folks can drop in and grab their packets, kind of get together as their group and figure out what they're going to be meeting throughout the day. So 10 o'clock will be that time to really meet with your team. We just learned today that there's also going to be a health committee hearing at 10 o'clock on the 14th. Excuse me, House Health. So we are going to try and get folks there at that 10 o'clock meeting as well. And then we have worked to kind of get these legislative meetings scheduled from between 10 and 3. I think our earliest one is at 11, and we've got them going to about 2:30. There's also a lunch break during this block that can be happening in the NCGA cafeteria. But there's the address for the General Assembly. This is the building that you should look at. If you're coming in the front, you'll see the two flags. Make sure you don't walk on the seal because that is bad luck. Walk around the seal when you go into the door.
Just want to pop in and say that we're going to be covering lunch. So we'll send out a form letter for folks to fill out to say, yes, I want a lunch voucher. We're also going to cover parking for people, and we'll send out something about where you need to park and everything beforehand.
Matt, could you go back 2 slides just for a second so I can take a screenshot of the registration?
This one?
Yeah, hold
Yep.
just a second. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so at registration, you will receive your folder with your representatives and their office numbers if you've got meetings scheduled for that day, with your team schedule and meetings for the day, any leave behinds that you're going to have for our representatives, any policy handouts like our one-pager so that you'll have something to refer back to, your lunch voucher to be used in the North Carolina General Assembly cafeteria, which is going to be in the basement of the legislative building, feedback forms for your various meetings, and then this will also be where you can get your reimbursement for parking for those who need it. Now, legislative visits. As I mentioned, you're going to receive a packet at registration with your scheduled visits. If you have any scheduled visits with your office locations, representative names, and then of course, any policy materials that you'll need. You're going to be assigned with a group from folks from throughout your area, kind of your geographic area, so that you're not doing this alone. We don't want anybody to be alone whenever they're having meetings. There's always power in number. And as I mentioned, these meetings are going to happen between the 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. times slot, but and meetings will take place in both the legislative building and the legislative office building. So they're two different buildings, and I'll explain those in just a second. So this first one is the legislative building. This is the one that's off of Jones Street when you use that address where the seal is. Again, around the seal, don't walk over the seal. So navigating the legislative building, this place is a little bit of a maze and is very confusing, but hopefully this will kind of help you navigate it, because there's a little bit of a mind swirl whenever you walk in. So this is the main building, the LB legislative building, and any office that's going to be in this building is going to have 4 digits. So if you notice, there's kind of like 4 quadrants of the building. So there's the 1000 court, the 1100 court, the 1200 court, and the 1300 court. And the 4 different numbers, of course, correspond with that. So 10 office number, 11 office number, etc. So anything that's 4 digits is going to take place in this, and it'll have LB beside it. Lunch is also going to be in the basement of this building. There are a couple of different ways with the elevators to get down to the basement, and that's how you can access the legislative cafeteria. And as I mentioned, 4 digits legislative building is all going to take place here. We are going to be meeting that morning in the 1000 court of the legislative building. So organizational representatives from Health Action NC are going to be there throughout the day. So when you enter from the front of the building, so the, I forget what it's called, maybe Halifax Mall, is that? No, that Halifax is behind. What's in front? There's like the museums.
Bicentennial Mall.
Bicentennial Mall. I knew it was a mall. You'll enter from Bicentennial Mall, be directly across where the museums are and all of that. You'll enter from the front entrance, and it is the first court to your right. So you'll go through security, take an immediate right, and that's the 1000 court, and that's where we will be stationed. Get your materials. If you have anything you need to check in on, there will be organizational representatives from Hank that will be there to help you throughout the day. It'll kind of be our launching off spot. Now, there's another building that is not a part of the legislative building. If you look in this picture, it's in that kind of middle left. It's called the legislative office building. So if you look on your schedule and you have a room with 3 digits and LOB, it'll take place in this kind of gray building, large gray building directly when you leave the NCGA at the back between the 1100 and 1200 courts to what is Halifax Mall, another mall. And it is going to be right there to your left, the legislative office building. One thing that's really important to recognize when you walk into the legislative office building, when you enter that way, you are entering on the 3rd floor. It gets really confusing. There are 2 floors below there, but the 3rd floor is going to be where you enter. So you will kind of figure it out from there. So if you have a 300 number, of course, it'll be on that floor, 400, 500, etc. Margie, I see your hand up. I will hop over to you.
Are you planning a press conference or not? Is it just going to be meetings?
We're not
do you
doing.
have people with good stories to be in Raleigh. I've shared my story with my brother-in-law multiple times. So, but I just
Yes.
wondered if you needed people.
Well, thank you for that. We do have storytellers that we have lined up to talk to press. We're not doing a press conference, but we are doing a media advisory, and we're touching base with press beforehand, and also trying to set them up with some of the storyteller advocates and encouraging them to follow us along while we're doing our deliveries, because we're delivering hand-drawn, hearts that say, love thy neighbor, expand Medicaid from kids across the state, and candy. And we're also going to give the press candy in hopes that will make them want to cover us. I won't call it bribery, but
It sounds like a plan. If you need extra stories, of course, you can always use our Jeff Moore story, or put my name and number down for additional info if you need it.
thank you so much, Margie.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, a couple of things to note about entering the legislative building and the legislative office building. In both of those oh gosh, I'm flying around. Give me 1 second. I don't know why. Okay, there we go. Upon entering both buildings, you're going to have to go through metal detectors and send all of your belongings through a conveyor belt for x-ray screening. Every time you do this, every time you enter one of the buildings, you are going to have to do this. So just be prepared, give yourself a little bit of time to getting in and out of the buildings, because it's a little bit tedious, but it's just part of the process. So like with an airport, you're gonna have to take your electronics that are like bigger than a tablet out of your bag, make sure your pockets are empty. They will also likely tell you to remove any keys that you have. So I always try and make sure that I have my keys easily accessible, because that way it's not something that's holding somebody up. So if you keep your keys in your bag or book bag or whatever, make sure that you have those ready to be taken out, because they will ask you to remove any keys that you have, and completely clear your pockets. And as I mentioned, this does get a little bit backed up sometimes, so make sure you're giving yourself and your team plenty of time to get from meeting to meeting, since you will have to do this every time you go in and out of a building. Excuse me, just in a building, not out of a building. But as soon as you go into a new building, you're gonna have to go through this again. We talked about our advocacy roles already, but just as a refresher, we've got our introducer, storyteller, fact knower, note taker, and social media magician, because everyone has a place in advocacy, and these are going to help us kind of create our meeting strategies. And just a couple of quick reminders. So legislative schedules can change really quickly, and representatives can be pulled into meetings on super short notice. So even though it's really frustrating, we got to make sure that we're as flexible as possible. So we've had these meetings scheduled for about 2 weeks at this point, but there is always a chance that the meeting can get rescheduled or canceled based on somebody getting pulled into a committee meeting or some other kind of legislative meeting. So just be flexible. It can be frustrating, but even if you don't have a meeting scheduled, or if you have a meeting scheduled and it gets canceled, be sure to still drop by and leave your one pager with the LAs. The LAs are a great contact to have, and they are a great person to pass along the information to their representative. And of course, representatives work for the people, so you have every right to be in there and having these conversations with them about your subject matter. So make sure that you are taking use of your rights. Finally, I always kind of highlight 2 good areas for parking whenever I go to the General Assembly. So there is an outdoor uncovered lot, which is on Wilmington Street. It's 101 North Wilmington Street. You can see this little star. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it is right on the top right corner where it says parking. There's a little red dot. Ooh, my computer is just flying all over the place tonight. So that star is the Wilmington lot. There is also a parking deck called the Green Square parking deck that is right, I think it's connected to the Science Museum. That's also a great, if you wanted to have a covered deck. It's a little bit of a walk. As you can see, the legislative building is at the very tip top right there, behind Jones Street. So it's a little bit of a walk from the Green Square parking deck. The Wilmington lot is a little bit closer, but it is an outdoor lot. So just something to take into consideration. And with that, that is my contact number and my email for folks if they have any questions about any of this kind of stuff. It's a hassle navigating these buildings. They're confusing, but we are there to help. So here's my information that I am happy to answer any questions that folks have. And I will stop sharing there.
Just FYI also to folks, we are going to be sending out a reminder email on Monday. Since we are covering parking, it's not for all the lots, but it is for 3 different lots potentially that you can use the parking coupon for. So we're going to make sure that you have those addresses that you can put in your GPS that will lead you right to where those parking lots are.
Perfect. With that pretty much wraps up the stuff that I have as far as just kind of setting up meetings and navigating the buildings. I will pause there and see if anybody has any questions. And if not, I will turn it over to Rebecca for any final announcements.
You said the bill was introduced today as a fairly clean bill, but you said something about a hospital, something or other. What's that?
It's something called HASP, which is like hospital stabilization payments. It's just something that the federal government gives to bolster hospitals, you know, that might be struggling, but you have to, you know, request them in a certain way. And so that's all in that as well. In fact, the majority of the bill is actually on the HASP money. And So yeah, that's the only thing that it's tied together with, but it's not like contingent on it. It's they do work together. So it's not like any kind of like weird poison pill or something that isn't, just routine.
And it's considered a good thing.
Yeah. It helps. It brings in money for the hospitals. I mean, it's basically free federal money to go towards hospitals.
Does it go to all hospitals, even Duke and UNC, or with just the rural hospitals?
I'm not sure about that. I have to look it up or ask my policy analyst. I'll ask her tomorrow.
All
Well,
right. Well,
thank
Rebecca,
you.
any announcements from you before we wrap up?
No, just keep a lookout for the reminder email, which will have any last minute updates. Things are a tad different because of that House Health Committee meeting, but we are going to still have people in that 1000 court to meet you when you're there and give you instructions about what to do, and and the packets to do the drop-offs if you're not doing legislative visits, or who you can go with who is doing legislative visits and all that good stuff. We'll work on all of that with all of you as you come in, and we're really looking forward to seeing you.
Okay. This has been very helpful. So.
Thanks for all
Great.
you're doing.
Thanks, Margie. Thanks,
Sure.
Norma.